Hey, everybody, welcome to the Healing Place Church Daily Devotional Podcast. We are enjoying our time through the book of Luke, and today we're going to be looking at the most important event in human history, and definitely the most important event for us as believers, and it is the crucifixion of Christ. So we are in Luke chapter 23. We're going to highlight verses 44 through 46. It says this, "By this time it was about noon, and darkness fell across the whole land until about 3 o'clock. The light from the sun was gone, and suddenly the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn down the middle. Then Jesus shouted, 'Father, I entrust my spirit into your hands.' And with those words, he breathed his last." I want to talk to you about two quick observations from this text. I want to talk to you about the covering and then the uncovering, the covering and the uncovering. First, let's talk about the covering. So here Jesus is hanging on the cross, and all of a sudden, unexpectedly, there's this darkness that overcomes the land. The sun is covered. And you say, well, okay, is this for dramatic effect? What's kind of going on here? What's the theological reasoning behind this? And actually what we have to do is we have to look back at the Old Testament to really see what's going on here. So all the way back in the Old Testament, whenever God was placing what we call the plagues, right? Or really they were just judgments on Egypt. One of the things God did was he covered the sun. So he covered the sun as a judgment upon the nation of Egypt. So what we see here is that in the Bible, this idea of the sun being covered, right, this darkness overcoming something, the light being thrown out, what we see is a sign of God's judgment. Well, what judgment is happening in this moment? Well, it's the judgment of Jesus. The Father is pouring out his wrath and judgment on the Son. And Jesus did not deserve this. Jesus was innocent, and he's the only one who never deserved the judgment of the Father. And honestly, when you look at all of the gospel writings, when you look at all the things that are going on in this moment, there's a lot to be said about this. But as painful as the physical crucifixion of Christ was, this was honestly the most painful part of the process for Jesus. It was this distance between him and the Father. You see, Jesus had enjoyed this eternity past of fellowship and oneness with the Father. And here he is being judged by the one he's closest to, by the one he loves the most, and doing so undeservedly. He's doing it for you, and he's doing it for me. So you see here, we see the covering, but then we see this uncovering. So what happens here is as this darkness overcomes, right there at the end of this moment, right there at the end of the 6 hours of the crucifixion of Jesus, what do we see? We see that the temple curtain is torn down the middle. What does that mean? So in the temple, and again, all of this, we have to go back to our Old Testament understanding to begin to understand the weight and the gravity of what is actually happening here. But there was this giant curtain. And now this curtain during the time of Christ was about 4 inches thick. It was 60 feet by 30 feet. I mean, that is huge. According to history, it took hundreds of men to just hoist it up into place. It was such a heavy piece of fabric. Well, this curtain prevented people from entering into this place called the Holy of Holies. Basically, it's where God's perfect presence dwelled, and there was no access. Only one person, the high priest, one time per year could even enter into this place. And this giant curtain basically was this lack of access. And so when Jesus is being judged, he's hanging on the cross, it says that the temple curtain is torn. What's interesting is one of the other gospel writers tells us that the curtain was torn from top to bottom, symbolizing that this was a tearing from heaven down to earth. And it says this, then Jesus shouted. You see, I want you to see how all of this is connected. First, there's a covering, right? The sun is covered. This darkness, this judgment is coming on Christ. Then there's this uncovering. The covered Holy of Holies has now opened up and granted us access to the Father. These two things are connected. You see, Jesus had to be judged so that we could have eternal access to the Father. And it's in that judgment that he has bought for us something unbelievable, the ability to enter into God's presence. So we see the covering and we see the uncovering, and it says, then Jesus shouted, Father, I entrust my spirit into your hands. You see, Jesus knew at this moment that the work was finished, that he had paid the price, and we now had access to the Father. So what do we do with this? What do we take away? There's so much to meditate on. There's so much to pray about. There's so much to think about. Here's my one challenge to you today. It's this. Take advantage of the access that God has given you. Jesus paid the highest price for you to have this access. And we should not go a day or a moment forgetting about the access that we have to the Father, forgetting about the access that Jesus has bought for us. And so as a believer today, I encourage you with this. Man, utilize that access. Run to the presence of the Father. And the Hebrews chapter 4 tells us that we have that access and we can run with confidence and boldness. So that's my challenge today. Meditate on these things, think through it. Thank you so much for being with us today. Be back with us next time as we continue walking through the book of Luke.